They said she was useless. They said her hands shook too much to hold a skillet, and her eyes were too dim to spot a fly in the soup. But on the Arizona frontier, appearances are the deadliest kind of lie. When Colonel Silas Thorne threw Martha Higgins into the mud like a sack of rotten feed, he thought he was discarding trash. He didn't know he was arming his worst enemy. Talon, an Apache warrior fighting to keep his ancestral land, saw something in that old woman's eyes that no one else did. He didn't hire a cook that day. He hired a legend. And the vengeance she brought down on that valley, it would be written in blood. The heat in Red Rock Canyon was enough to blister the paint off a wagon wheel. It was high noon, the kind of silence that usually preceded a gunshot, but today the violence was in words. Colonel Silas Thorne stood on the porch of his sprawling plantation-style ranch house, the Double T. Thorne was a man who wore his cruelty like a polished badge. He was shouting at a small, huddled figure in the dirt. It was Martha Higgins. At 64, Martha looked like a stiff wind could blow her into the next territory. She was wearing a faded calico dress stained with flour and mud. "Get your things and get off my land, you useless hag," Thorne bellowed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I asked for a rare steak, not charcoal. You're shaking so bad you're rattling the plates off the table. You're done." Martha didn't beg. She didn't cry. She slowly reached down, picked up her battered carpet bag, and dusted off her knees. Her silence seemed to infuriate Thorne even more. He kicked dust at her. Watching from the ridge, 300 yards away, sat Talon. Talon was a ghost in his own country. Half Apache, half white, he was unwanted by the tribe for his mixed blood and hated by the townspeople for his heritage. He owned 40 acres of scrubland adjacent to Thorne's massive estate, land that Thorne had been trying to steal for 5 years because it held the only year-round spring in the sector. Talon nudged his horse, a roan mustang named Shadow, and slowly descended the ridge. He didn't ride with the swagger of a cowboy. He rode with the stillness of a predator. He reined up between the colonel and the old woman. Thorne's hand hovered near his Colt Peacemaker. "Get off my land, half-breed," Thorne spat, "unless you're finally here to sell." Talon ignored him. He looked down at Martha. "You can cook?" Martha looked up. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were a piercing, unexpected blue. "I can cook better than I can run, son. I need a cook, can't pay much, just a roof and food." Thorne laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Take her! One piece of trash collecting another. She'll burn your house down before the week is out." Talon extended a hand. Martha took it. Her grip was surprisingly dry and firm. He pulled her up onto the back of his horse. Without a word to the colonel, Talon turned Shadow around and rode toward his shack, leaving the wealthy rancher laughing in the dust. Neither of them knew it yet, but the colonel had just signed his own death warrant. Talon's ranch was a shack, barely standing against the wind. Inside, it was a bachelor's mess of unwashed tins, dust, and neglected gear. "It ain't much," Talon grunted, setting her bag down. Martha looked around, pursing her lips. "I've seen worse, usually in prison camps." Talon paused, looking at her, but she had already turned away, finding a broom. For the first 2 weeks, it was a quiet arrangement. Talon would leave before dawn to mend fences and watch his small herd of cattle, the few he had left after Thorne's men had mysteriously stampeded the rest. When he returned at dusk, the shack was transformed. The floors were scrubbed, the air smelled of sage and stew, and his clothes were mended. But it was the small things that unnerved him. One evening, Talon came in with a deep gash on his forearm from a barbed wire snag. He sat down to wrap it with a dirty rag. "Don't use that," Martha said. Her voice was sharp. She walked over with a bowl of steaming water and a pouch of dried leaves. "It's just a scratch," Talon said. "It's an infection waiting to kill you," she retorted. She cleaned the wound with a precision that didn't match her shaking hands. She applied a paste that smelled of earth and bitterness. "Yarrow and golden seal. Stops the bleeding, kills the rot." Talon watched her. "You learned that from the tribes?" "I learned it from a life you don't ask about," she replied simply. The dynamic changed the night the wolves came. Or at least, they looked like wolves. Talon woke to the sound of his horses screaming. He grabbed his Winchester and ran out into the moonlight. 3 shapes were tearing at the corral fence. They weren't wolves, they were men in furs, cutting the ropes. Thorn's men. Talon raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a crack echoed from the porch behind him. One of the men in the furs yelled, clutching his shoulder, spinning around. Crack! The second man's hat flew off, pinned to the fence post. The third man scrambled, fleeing into the dark. Talon turned around. Martha was standing on the porch in her nightgown, holding an old, heavy Buffalo Sharps rifle. Smoke curled lazily from the barrel. She didn't look frail. She looked like stone. "You missed the third one," Talon said, shocked. "I didn't miss," Martha said, cycling the lever. "I left him to tell Thorn that the rules have changed." The next morning, the silence between them was heavy, but different. It was the silence of soldiers sharing a trench. "You shoot like a marksman," Talon said, over coffee. Martha didn't look up from her dough. "My husband was Sergeant Major Elias Higgins, Union Army. Taught me to shoot so I wouldn't starve while he was gone. Turns out he died, and I kept shooting." "Why did Thorn really fire you, Martha?" She stopped kneading the dough. "Because I saw things. Thorn isn't just a rancher, Talon. He's a broker. He's moving things through this valley that don't belong here. Government rifles, stolen gold." Talon leaned forward. "He wants my land for the water." "No," Martha said, locking eyes with him. "He wants your land because of the cave." Talon frowned. "The cave in the North Ridge. It's empty. Just bats and dust." "It's not empty," Martha whispered. "Thorn has a map. It belonged to the Confederate Treasury. He thinks the lost shipment from 65 is buried under your North Ridge. That's why he's trying to drive you out. He doesn't want the water. He wants the gold." The revelation hung in the air. If Thorn found out, Martha had told Talon, he wouldn't just fire her, he would hang her. "We need to go to the sheriff," Talon said. "Sheriff Miller is on Thorn's payroll," Martha scoffed. "We're on our own." Later that day, Talon rode out to check the herd. He found 3 of his best steers dead near the creek, foaming at the mouth. He returned to the house, his face dark with rage. He poisoned the water. Martha walked out to the trough. She dipped a finger in, smelled it, and wiped it on her apron. Not the water. He poisoned the salt lick, strychnine. "I'm going to kill him," Talon growled, reaching for his gun belt. "No," Martha grabbed his arm. Her grip was iron. "You ride in there. His hired guns. Kincaid and the rest will cut you down before you clear the gate. You want to beat a man like Thorn? You don't use a hammer. You use a scalpel." "I'm an Apache," Talon said. "We use a tomahawk." "I'm an old woman," Martha smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "We use dinner." The plan was insane. It relied entirely on Thorn's arrogance. 2 days later, Martha dressed in her Sunday best. She hitched up Talon's wagon and rode straight to the front gates of the Double T. Kincaid, Thorn's head enforcer, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, stopped her. "Where do you think you're going, Granny?" "I'm here to beg for my job back," Martha lied smoothly. That savage lives like a pig. I can't take it. I'll cook for free if the colonel just lets me have my room back." Kincaid laughed. "Colonel's hosting a dinner party tonight. Senator Blanton is coming. We are short-staffed." They let her in. Talon watched from the ridge through a spy-glass. His heart was hammering. If they caught her, if she slipped up. Inside the kitchen, Martha was a whirlwind of activity. She apologized profusely to the staff, humbled herself, and took over the preparation of the roast. She prepared the wine, the sides, and the special gravy Colonel Thorne loved so much, but in the folds of her dress she carried a small vial. It wasn't poison, not exactly. It was a concentrated extract of datura, Jimson weed. In high doses, it was lethal. In the dose Martha used, it caused hallucinations, paralysis, and terrifying confusion. She served the dinner. Thorne sat at the head of the table, laughing with the corrupt Senator Blanton, boasting about how he would have the Indian land by the end of the month. "This gravy is exceptional, Martha," Thorne sneered. "Glad you learned your place." "I aim to please, Colonel," she said, pouring him more wine. By the time the dessert was served, the room fell silent. Thorne blinked, rubbing his eyes. Is the room spinning?" Senator Blanton tried to stand up, but his legs gave way. He collapsed into his chair, giggling uncontrollably at a shadow on the wall. Thorne grabbed the table edge. What did you do?" Martha stood at the end of the table. She wasn't hunched anymore. She stood tall. "I seasoned the meat, Silas, just like you like it." Thorne reached for his gun, but his hand flopped uselessly onto the tablecloth like a dead fish. Outside, the signal whistle blew. The moon hung high over the Double T Ranch, a pale, watchful eye staring down at the sprawling estate. To any casual observer, the ranch house was a beacon of civilization in the savage dark of the territory. Golden light spilled from the tall French pane windows, casting long rectangles of warmth onto the manicured lawn. Laughter and the clink of crystal drifted on the wind, a stark contrast to the silence of the surrounding desert. But 20 yards away, crouching in the shadow of a massive water oak, Talon Blackwolf was not looking at a party. He was looking at a fortress he was about to breach. He checked the load in his Winchester Model 1873. The brass cartridges were cold against his thumb. He had rubbed charcoal and grease over the metal of the receiver to dull its shine, and painted his own face with streaks of ash and mud. He wasn't a rancher tonight. He was the ghost the town whispered about. Inside the house, the trap had already been sprung. The dinner of the damned. In the grand dining room, under the light of a massive crystal chandelier imported from New Orleans, the atmosphere had shifted from jovial to nightmarish in the span of 10 minutes. Martha Higgins stood by the sideboard, her hands folded demurely over her apron. To the guests, she was just the old, invisible help. But her eyes were sharp, tracking the terrifying progression of the datura, the Jimson weed extract she had slipped into the heavy gravy boat. Colonel Silas Thorne sat at the head of the long mahogany table. 5 minutes ago, he had been boasting about the railroad contract he was sure to win. Now, he was staring at his fork with a look of profound confusion. "The tines," Thorne mumbled, his tongue feeling thick and heavy in his mouth. "Why are the tines moving?" To his right, Senator Blanton, a portly man with a penchant for expensive bourbon, suddenly slammed his hands onto the table. "Get them off me!" he shrieked, his face draining of blood. He began to claw frantically at his silk cravat. "Spiders! They're in my collar! Get them off!" The other guests, a corrupt land surveyor and the local banker, were in similar states of distress. The banker was weeping silently, staring at the roast beef as if it were a dead relative, while the surveyor was trying to drink from a wine glass he had already dropped on the floor. Kincaid, standing guard by the double doors leading to the kitchen, frowned. He wasn't eating, so his mind was clear. He took a step forward, his hand resting on the pearl handle of his Colt. "Colonel?" Kincaid asked, his voice rough. "What the hell is wrong with him?" Thorne looked up. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises. To him, Kincaid wasn't his trusted enforcer. Kincaid's face was melting, the skin dripping like wax. "Demon!" Thorne roared, stumbling to his feet. He reached for the revolver on his hip, but his motor functions had been severed from his intent. His hand flopped uselessly against his thigh, his fingers refusing to grip. "Betrayal! The walls are breathing!" Kincaid realized instantly this wasn't drunkenness. "Don't touch the food," he bellowed to the other guards. "Secure the room. It's poison." Kincaid drew his weapon, scanning the room for the source. His eyes landed on Martha. She hadn't moved. She hadn't screamed. She was watching them with a cold, terrifying serenity. "You!" Kincaid snarled, raising his gun. "You witch! What did you do?" Martha didn't flinch. She reached into her apron pocket. Kincaid expected a gun. Instead, she pulled out a silver whistle. "I served dessert," she said calmly. She blew the whistle. The sound was high and piercing, cutting through the screams of the hallucinating senator. The breech crash. The French window behind the colonel exploded inward. Glass shards sprayed across the room like diamond shrapnel. Talon came through the frame, feet first, tucking into a roll across the expensive Persian rug. He came up in a crouch, the Winchester already shouldered. Kincaid spun around, distracted by the noise. That split-second hesitation cost him. Crack. Talon's first shot didn't aim to kill. He needed chaos, not a massacre yet. The bullet struck the heavy chain of the crystal chandelier above the table. With a groan of tearing metal, the massive fixture plummeted. It crashed onto the center of the dining table, shattering crystal, crushing the roast, and sending the delirious guests scrambling backward in a shower of glass and candlelight. The room was instantly plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the fireplace and the few candles that remained upright in the wreckage. "Get down, Ma!" Talon shouted, cycling the lever of his rifle. Martha was already moving. She kicked the legs out from under the heavy serving cart she was standing next to. The cart tipped over, creating a makeshift barricade between her and Kincaid. Kincaid fired blindly through the dust and smoke. The bullet bit into the wood of the serving cart, inches from Martha's hip. "Kill him!" Kincaid screamed to the two other guards in the room. "Kill the Indian!" The guards, coughing in the dust, opened fire. Bullets chewed into the mahogany paneling of the walls. Talon vaulted over a high-backed velvet chair, using the furniture as cover. He was a whirlwind of violence. He popped up, fired, and ducked. The first guard took a round to the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the screaming Senator Blanton. The second guard charged, thinking to overwhelm Talon in close quarters. Talon didn't retreat. He dropped the rifle to his hip, stepped inside the guard's swing, and drove the brass butt plate of the Winchester into the man's jaw. The guard crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. That left Kincaid. The enforcer was smart. He had taken cover behind the heavy oak door frame. He was firing methodically, pinning Talon down behind the overturned chair. "You're trapped, boy!" Kincaid yelled. "The boys in the bunkhouse heard that. You have 30 seconds before an army comes through that door." Talon looked at Martha. She was pinned down on the other side of the room. Between them lay the wreckage of the chandelier and the hallucinating Colonel Thorne, who was currently fighting an imaginary battle with a velvet curtain. "The water," Talon signaled to her. Martha looked at the mess on the floor. Among the debris was the silver samovar, a large urn used for keeping tea water piping hot. It had been knocked over, but the lid was still clamped shut. It was right next to her. She understood. "Hey, ugly!" Martha shouted at Kincaid. Kincaid reflexively looked toward her voice. Martha grabbed the handle of the samovar using a thick napkin and hurled the vessel with shocking strength for a woman of her age. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it didn't need to be. It hit the floor in front of Kincaid, and the lid popped off. Gallons of scalding water splashed across the floor and onto Kincaid's boots and shins. Kincaid howled, instinctively dancing back from the searing pain. That momentary distraction was all Talon needed. He broke cover, sprinting across the room. He didn't shoot. He needed his ammo. He tackled Colonel Thorne, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection and taking them both to the floor behind the solid oak sideboard. "The safe, Martha!" Talon yelled. "Now!" The heist Martha scrambled up. She ran to the far wall, where a massive oil painting of Thorne's mother hung. She didn't treat it with reverence. She grabbed the gilded frame and ripped it from the wall, tossing it aside. Behind it sat a black iron safe. "He changes the combination every month," Talon shouted, firing a suppression shot at the doorway to keep Kincaid back. "Do you know it?" "It's his birthday," Martha scoffed, her fingers flying over the dial. "The man is a narcissist. Left to 18, right to 22, left to 45. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of cash, thousands of dollars in gold certificates and silver coins, a fortune that could buy half the state. Martha didn't touch the money. Her hands bypassed the gold and grabbed a thick, leather-bound ledger and a rolled-up parchment map. "I got it!" she yelled, shoving the book into her waistband and clutching the map. "We leave the money," Talon ordered. "We aren't thieves. We're taking back the truth." Suddenly, the kitchen doors burst open. Kincaid had rallied. He was limping, his face twisted in rage, and he had 2 more men with him, fresh from the hallway. "Burn them down!" Kincaid roared. Bullets shredded the sideboard Talon was hiding behind. Splinters rained down on him and the gibbering colonel. "We can't go out the way we came," Talon assessed quickly. The window was covered by the new shooters. He looked at Thorne. The colonel was curled in a fetal position, sobbing. "The snakes. They have human faces." Talon grabbed Thorne by the collar and hauled him up. "You're our ticket out of here, Silas." Talon stood up, dragging Thorne in front of him as a human shield. "Hold your fire!" Kincaid screamed, signaling his men to stop. "You hit the colonel, and I'll skin you alive." The shooting stopped abruptly. The room fell into a tense, ringing silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the men and the whimpering of the senator in the corner. Talon pressed the cold barrel of his Colt Peacekeeper against Thorne's temple. "Back off," Talon growled. His voice was low, dangerous, like a wolf cornered in a cave. "Drop the guns or your boss gets a new ventilation hole in his head." Kincaid hesitated. He looked at Thorne, then at Talon. The hate in his eyes was palpable. "You think you can walk out of here? There's 20 men surrounding the house." "Then tell them to move," Talon said. "Martha, get behind me." Martha moved behind Talon, clutching the stolen evidence. They formed a tight train, Talon shielding Martha, Thorne shielding Talon. "Move back!" Kincaid spat, lowering his gun slightly. "Let them pass." The guards parted. Talon began to back toward the side door that led to the veranda. "He's a demon!" Thorne mumbled, drool running down his chin. "Don't let him take my soul." "Shut up, Silas," Talon whispered. The escape. They reached the door. Talon kicked it open, stepping out into the cool night air. But Kincaid wasn't a man to play fair. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Kincaid signaled the gunman on the roof. Bang! A rifle shot from the second-story balcony tore through the wood of the doorframe, missing Martha's head by an inch. Splinters flew into her cheek. "Run!" Talon shoved Thorne forward, causing the colonel to stumble down the porch stairs. The courtyard erupted. Men were pouring out of the bunkhouse, pulling on suspenders and racking shotgun slides. "To the wagon!" Talon shouted. He raised his Winchester and fired 3 rapid shots at the balcony, forcing the sniper to duck. They sprinted toward the hitching rail where Talon had left the buckboard wagon he had stolen from the barn earlier. Martha was surprisingly fast. She threw the ledger into the wagon bed and scrambled up onto the driver's seat. She grabbed the reins of the 2 startled horses. Talon grabbed Thorn, who was trying to crawl away into the rose bushes, and heaved him into the back of the wagon like a sack of feed. Talon vaulted in after him. "Go! Go! Go!" Talon yelled. Martha snapped the reins hard. "Higher!" The horses, spooked by the gunfire, surged forward. The wagon lurched, the wheels spinning in the gravel before finding purchase. Kincaid burst out of the front door, leveling his pistol. He fired wildly. A bullet punched a hole through the side of the wagon, blowing apart a crate of supplies. Talon returned fire from the back of the bouncing wagon. He saw Kincaid flinch and grab his leg, the wound from earlier reopening, or perhaps a new graze. "Don't let them get to the gate!" Kincaid screamed. "Cut them off!" 2 riders on horseback came tearing around the corner of the barn, trying to intercept them. "Ma, 2 on the left!" Talon shouted. Martha didn't panic. She saw the riders closing in. Instead of steering away, she hauled on the left rein, swerving the heavy wagon into the path of the lead rider. The rider's horse shied away from the massive wooden wheels of the wagon, rearing up. The rider was thrown from the saddle, landing hard in the dirt. The second rider tried to bring his gun to bear, but the wagon was moving too fast, bouncing violently over the rutted ground. Talon took aim, timing the bounce. He fired. The rider's hat flew off, and he peeled away, clutching his ear. They hit the main gate. It was closed. "Hold on!" Martha screamed. She didn't slow down. She whipped the horses into a frenzy. The heavy wooden gate loomed closer. Thorn screamed from the floor of the wagon, "We're going to crash!" At the last second, the sheer weight and momentum of the wagon, combined with the panic of the horses, smashed into the timber. The latch shattered. The wood splintered. The gates burst open with a deafening crack. They flew out onto the open road, dust billowing behind them. Talon knelt at the back of the wagon, rifle raised, watching the lights of the ranch fade into the distance. A few scattered shots followed them, buzzing like angry hornets, but falling short. He looked down at Thorn, who was curled in a ball, weeping. He looked up at the driver's seat. Martha sat rigid, her knuckles white on the reins, her grey hair coming loose from its bun and whipping in the wind. She looked like a Valkyrie of the plains. Talon slumped against the side of the wagon, his chest heaving. He looked at the ledger lying next to his boot. They had done it. They had the man, and they had the proof. But as he watched the torches mobilizing back at the ranch, forming a long, serpentine line of fire heading their way, he knew the night wasn't over. "Don't slow down, Martha," Talon called out, reloading his weapon. "They're coming. Let them come!" Martha shouted back over the wind, her voice filled with a terrifying exhilaration. "I'm just getting started." The adrenaline that had fueled their escape from the Double T Ranch began to curdle into a cold, hard dread. Inside Talon's small, weathered shack, the air was thick with the smell of old coffee, gun oil, and the sour reek of Colonel Silas Thorne's fear. They had tied the colonel to a rough-hewn oak chair in the center of the room. His fine evening jacket was torn, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. The effects of the datura had mostly faded, leaving him trembling, sweating, and acutely aware of the barrel of the Sharps buffalo rifle Martha was cleaning at the table. Talon stood by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Outside, the night was dangerously quiet. The crickets had stopped singing. "You're dead," Thorn croaked, his voice cracking. "Both of you. You think kidnapping me solves this? Kincaid will tear this shack apart, plank by plank. He doesn't need me alive to keep his paycheck." Martha didn't look up. She flipped open the heavy leather-bound ledger they had stolen from the safe. She ran a calloused finger down the column of numbers. "June 12th, 1874, she read aloud, her voice steady and damning. "Payment to Senator Blanton, $2,000. The same week the government supply train disappeared near Fort Verde." She turned the page. "August 4th, $500 to Sheriff Miller. Clean-up fees." That was the week the McCloskey family was found dead, wasn't it, Silas? The sheriff said it was Apaches. But Apaches don't leave boot prints with cavalry heels. Thorne's face went pale, drained of blood. You can't understand what you're reading. That book is complicated financial." "It's a death list," Martha snapped, slamming the book shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. She stood up and walked over to him, leaning down until they were nose to nose. "My husband died for this country, Silas, and you've been selling it off piece by piece to line your pockets with gold stained in blood. This isn't just theft, it's treason." Thorne swallowed hard, looking away from her piercing blue eyes. "Name your price," he whispered. "I have money buried in Mexico. $10,000. You can disappear. Just give me the book." Talon turned from the window. "We don't want your money." "Then what do you want, savage?" Thorne spat, regaining a flicker of his arrogance. "Justice," Talon said calmly, "and we're going to get it in Tucson." "You'll never make it to Tucson," Thorne sneered. "Look outside." Talon didn't need to look. He could hear it now, the low rumble of hooves. Not one or two horses, but a stampede. The sound of leather creaking, bits jingling, and the heavy thud of boots hitting the hard-packed earth. Talon blew out the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. "They're here," Talon whispered. Through the slats of the shutters, the darkness of the canyon suddenly bloomed with light. Torches, dozens of them. They bobbed in the night like angry fireflies, encircling the shack. The flickering orange light cast long, dancing shadows across the floorboards of the cabin. "Talon!" A voice roared from the darkness. It was Kincaid. His voice was gravel and hate, amplified by the canyon walls. "I know you're in there, and I know you have the colonel. Send him out, and I might just kill you quick." Talon checked his Winchester. He patted his belt. "I have 12 rounds in the rifle, 6 in the pistol." Martha checked the breech of her sharps. 5 rounds, and a box of shells in the cupboard. "There are 20 men out there, Martha," Talon said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Maybe 30. They aren't ranch hands. They're hired guns." "We hold them off," Martha said, though her voice trembled slightly. "We hold them until daylight." "We won't make it to daylight," Talon replied. A gunshot shattered the window glass, sending shards flying across the room. Martha ducked behind the heavy oak table they had overturned for cover. Thorne screamed as a bullet lodged in the wall inches from his head. "Don't shoot!" Thorne shrieked. "I'm in here, you idiots!" "Fire!" Kincaid commanded from outside. The shack erupted in chaos. Bullets shredded the thin wood of the walls, punching through with terrifying ease. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Pans fell from their hooks with deafening clatters. Talon moved low, crawling to a knothole near the door. He leveled his rifle, waited for a muzzle flash in the dark, and squeezed the trigger. A cry of pain from outside confirmed a hit. But for every shot Talon fired, 10 returned. "They're suppressing us!" Talon yelled over the roar of gunfire. "Keeping our heads down!" "Why?" Martha yelled back, dusting plaster from her hair. "So they can get close enough to burn us out." As if on cue, a heavy glass bottle smashed against the front porch. The smell of kerosene washed over them, sharp and chemical. Then a torch was thrown. Whoosh! The dry wood of the porch caught instantly. The fire roared to life, hungry and violent. The temperature inside the shack spiked within seconds. Smoke began to curl under the doorframe, black and choking. "Burn it down," Kincaid laughed from the safety of the dark. "Let's see how long the rats stay in the hole." Thorne was coughing now, straining against his ropes. "They're going to kill me. Kincaid doesn't care. He wants the ledger destroyed. He'll burn me to get to it." Talon looked at the ceiling. The flames were already licking at the roof beams. The crackle of burning timber was drowning out the gunfire. "Martha," Talon said, crawling over to her. He grabbed her shoulder. "The root cellar." Martha looked at him, confused, her eyes watering from the smoke. "The cellar?" "Talon, that's a grave. There's no way out. If we go down there, we suffocate or we burn." "Trust me," Talon said. He scrambled to the corner of the room, kicking aside a woven rug to reveal a trap door. He yanked it open. The air below was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the oven the cabin was becoming. "Get Thorne," Talon ordered. Martha didn't hesitate. She crawled to the colonel, sliced the ropes binding his legs with a paring knife, and hauled him up by his collar. "Move, you miserable snake," she shouted. "I'm not going down there." Thorne struggled. "It's a dead end." Talon didn't argue. He grabbed Thorne by the belt and the back of his neck and threw him down the hole. Thorne tumbled into the darkness with a yelp. "Go, Ma!" Talon pointed to the hole. Martha grabbed the ledger and the box of ammunition. She slid into the darkness. Talon took one last look around the shack. It had been his home for 5 years. It was a poor place, a lonely place, but it was his. Now, the roof was sagging, glowing angry red. The front door was beginning to buckle under the heat. "Goodbye," he whispered. He dropped down into the cellar. Reaching up, he grabbed the heavy iron handle of the trap door and slammed it shut. He quickly slid a heavy wooden bolt into place, a mechanism he had installed secretly months ago. Above them, the roar of the fire was muffled, but the heat still radiated through the wood. "We're trapped," Thorne whimpered in the pitch black. "We're going to cook like potatoes." Talon struck a match. The sudden flare of light illuminated the small earthen root cellar. Shelves of jarred peaches and dried meat lined the walls. Talon moved to the back wall, behind a stack of potato sacks. He shoved the sacks aside, revealing not a dirt wall, but a wooden pallet leaning against the earth. He kicked the pallet away. Behind it was a dark, narrow tunnel, dug by hand, shored up with scavenged timber. "I started digging this the day you threatened to burn me out 3 years ago, Colonel," Talon said, his voice cold. "I knew a man like you wouldn't fight fair." He looked at Martha. "It leads to the dry creek bed, 300 yards out, past their perimeter." Martha stared at the tunnel, then at Talon. A look of fierce pride crossed her face. "Lead the way, son." Above them, the roof of the cabin gave a terrifying groan. Dust rained down. "Move," Talon commanded. "The roof is coming down." They crawled into the earth, leaving the fire and their old lives behind them. The heat was the first thing they felt, a suffocating, physical weight that pressed down through the floorboards above. Then came the sound, the groaning of timber as the roof of the shack began to surrender to the flames. "Move!" Talon hissed, his voice echoing strangely in the cramped earthen tunnel. He was dragging Colonel Silas Thorne by the collar of his silk shirt. The wealthy rancher was coughing, his eyes streaming with tears from the smoke and the sheer terror of being pulled underground. Behind them, Martha Higgins crawled on her hands and knees, clutching the heavy ledger to her chest like it was a holy relic. The tunnel was narrow, a crude escape route Talon had dug over 2 winters, fearing exactly this kind of night. Roots tore at their clothes, and clumps of dry Arizona dirt rained down into their hair with every tremor of the burning house above. "It's going to collapse!" Thorne screamed, thrashing in the dark. "You're burying us alive, you savage!" Quiet! Talon slammed Thorn against the dirt wall, pressing a knife to the man's throat. The blade caught a flicker of light filtering down from the trap door before the entrance was swallowed by falling debris. The fire is loud, but Kincaid has ears like a coyote. You make another sound, and I leave you here for the worms. Thorn went limp, whimpering into the dust. They moved for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only 50 yards. The air grew cooler, smelling less of wood smoke and more of damp clay and sage. Finally, the tunnel opened up into the undercut of the dry creek bed, obscured by a thicket of mesquite bushes. They spilled out into the moonlight, gasping for air. Behind them, up the slope, Talon's home was a pyre. The flames licked 50 feet into the black sky, casting a hellish orange glow over the canyon. Silhouetted against the fire were the figures of Kincaid's mercenaries, laughing, passing a bottle of whiskey, waiting for the screams that would never come. Talon wiped the soot from his eyes and looked at Martha. She was trembling, not from age, but from adrenaline. She looked at the burning house, then at him. "You're home," she whispered. "Talon, I'm so wood and stone." Talon cut her off, his voice flat. "It can be rebuilt. Dead is forever." He turned to the shadows where he had tethered Shadow, his roan Mustang, and Martha's old mare, Bessie, earlier that evening when the trouble started. He grabbed Bessie's reins and shoved them into Martha's hands. "You're leaving," Talon said. "Now." Martha blinked, stunned. "We're leaving. Both of us. Look at the horses," Talon pointed. "Shadow is lame in the left foreleg. He can't carry double and he can't run fast enough to outpace Kincaid's thoroughbreds. Bessie is fresh. She can make Tucson by sunrise if you ride her hard." "I am not leaving you here to die," Martha snapped, her voice regaining that iron edge. "I didn't come this far to run away." "You aren't running away." Talon stepped closer, gripping her thin shoulders. His dark eyes bored into hers. "You are the mission, Martha. That ledger is the only thing that matters. If Kincaid catches us both, the truth dies in this canyon. Thorn wins. The valley dies." He looked over her shoulder at the ridge. "They think we're burning. In 10 minutes, when the roof caves in and they don't find bodies, they will start cutting for sign. They will find this tunnel. I have to stay here and make sure they don't follow you." "Talon," her voice cracked. "You're the only one I trust to finish this," he said softly. "I didn't hire a cook, Martha. I hired a warrior. Now ride." Martha stared at him for a heartbeat, agonizing indecision warring on her face. Then she nodded once. She jammed her foot into the stirrup and swung herself up with a grace that defied her 64 years. "You stay alive, Talon Blackwolf," she commanded, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face, "or I'll never forgive you." "Go!" He slapped the horse's flank. Martha wheeled the mare around and took off down the dry creek bed, the hooves muffled by the sand. Talon watched her go until she was swallowed by the darkness. Then he turned back to Thorn. The colonel was sitting in the dirt, trying to loosen the ropes on his wrists with his teeth. He froze when he saw the look on Talon's face. It was a look of pure, focused violence. "Up," Talon ordered. "Where are we going?" Thorn stammered. "To the high ground." 20 minutes later, the roof of the shack collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of sparks into the stars. Up on the ridge, Kincaid lowered his whiskey bottle. He frowned. He walked toward the smoldering ruin, his boots crunching on the gravel. He kicked a piece of burning timber aside. He peered into the cellar. "Empty," Kincaid growled. "They aren't here." He spun around, scanning the darkness. "Check the perimeter. Look for tracks. They couldn't have gone far." "Over here," one of the mercenaries shouted from the creek bed. "Fresh tracks. A horse heading south. Kincaid's eyes narrowed. Get the mounts. We run them down. Crack. A rifle shot echoed through the canyon, sharp and biting. The mercenary standing over the tracks spun around, his leg buckling as a bullet tore through his thigh. He hit the ground, screaming. "Cover!" Kincaid roared, diving behind a boulder. The shot had come from the north ridge, the opposite direction of the tracks. Talon lay prone on a flat shelf of granite, 300 yards away. He cycled the lever of his Winchester. He had positioned himself in a cluster of jagged rocks that offered a commanding view of the creek bed. Beside him, Thorn was gagged and tied to a scrub oak, his eyes bulging with panic as bullets began to chip away the rock face around them. "That's it," Talon whispered to himself. "Look at me. Forget about her." He was buying time. Every minute he held them here was a mile for Martha. But he had a problem. He checked his pockets. 7 rounds left in the Winchester, 3 in his Colt revolver. 10 bullets, 12 men. "There he is!" Kincaid shouted from below. "Up in the devil's chair. Flank him. Miller, take the left. Jones, go right. Keep his head down." The canyon erupted in gunfire. Bullets whined off the granite, sending sharp stone shrapnel slicing into Talon's cheek. He didn't flinch. He waited. He was an Apache. Patience was his armor. He saw movement to his left, a shadow detaching itself from the brush. Miller. Talon breathed out, steadying his aim. He squeezed the trigger. Bang! Miller dropped, rolling down the slope. 6, Talon counted. He shifted position, crawling on his belly to the other side of the rock formation. He knew Jones would be coming up the right side, expecting him to stay put. Talon waited until he heard the scrape of a boot on stone. He popped up, startling the mercenary who was less than 10 feet away. Bang! Jones fell backward, his shotgun discharging harmlessly into the sky. 5! "He's picking us apart!" a mercenary yelled from the valley floor. "He can see in the dark!" "Rush him!" Kincaid screamed, his voice filled with a manic fury. "He can't shoot us all at once. $500 to the man who brings me his scalp." The remaining men surged forward, abandoning cover for speed. They scrambled up the scree slope, firing wildly. Talon moved with the fluidity of water. He fired, cycled, fired again. 2 more men went down, clutching their chests, but the wave was getting closer. Click. Talon's Winchester was empty. He dropped the rifle and drew his revolver. He spun toward Thorn. The colonel was frantically sawing his ropes against the sharp edge of the scrub oak bark. The gag had slipped down his chin. "Help!" Thorn screamed, his voice shrill. "I'm up here! Don't shoot! It's me!" "Shut up!" Talon lunged, grabbing Thorn by the vest. But the distraction cost him. A bullet grazed Talon's ribs, spinning him around. The pain was a hot poker searing through his side. He fell to one knee, gasping. Kincaid crested the ridge, panting, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. 3 other men were right behind him. Talon raised his revolver. Bang! 1 man fell. Bang! Another clutched his shoulder. Bang! The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Talon threw the empty gun at Kincaid's face, but the big man swatted it aside. Kincaid leveled his dual pistols at Talon's chest. "Out of tricks, Indian!" Kincaid sneered. Talon backed up until his boots hit the edge of the cliff. 100-foot drop lay behind him. He was bleeding from his side, his face masked in sweat and soot. He looked at Thorn, who was laughing now, a hysterical, broken sound. "You lose!" Thorn spat, crawling toward Kincaid. "I told you, you're nothing but dirt to be walked on." Kincaid holstered 1 pistol and walked forward, savoring the moment. "Where's the old woman? Where's the book?" Talon spat blood onto the rocks. "Halfway to hell. Why don't you go ask her?" Kincaid smashed the pistol grip across Talon's jaw. Talon crumpled to the ground, his vision blurring. "I'll find her," Kincaid said, cocking the hammer of his Colt. After I'm done with you, I'm going to make this slow, Talon. I'm going to make you wish you died in that fire." Kincaid placed the barrel against Talon's forehead. The metal was cool against his burning skin. Talon closed his eyes. He thought of his ancestors. He thought of the land. He thought of Martha, hoping she made it. He had bought her 2 hours. It had to be enough. "Any last words, Breed?" Kincaid asked. The wind whistled through the canyon. The sun was just beginning to crest the eastern horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and blood red. Talon opened his eyes. He looked past Kincaid toward the rising sun. "Yeah," Talon whispered. "Duck." Kincaid frowned. "What?" Boom! The sound was not a pistol crack. It was a roar, a thunderclap that rolled across the valley floor like a cannon shot. Kincaid's head snapped back violently. A red mist sprayed into the air where his left ear had been. The heavy lead slug from a buffalo rifle had missed his skull by an inch, shattering the rock behind him. Kincaid screamed, dropping his gun, clutching the side of his head, disoriented by the concussion. Talon didn't hesitate. Despite his wounds, he launched himself forward, tackling Kincaid. They rolled near the edge of the cliff. "Get him!" Thorne shrieked to the remaining mercenaries. But the mercenaries were frozen. They were looking at the ridgeline to the east. Silhouetted against the blinding morning sun sat a rider on a horse. She sat straight-backed, the heavy barrel of a Sharp's Big 50 rifle resting on her shoulder, smoke curling lazily from the muzzle. And she wasn't alone. Flanking Martha Higgins were 6 men in dusters, stars gleaming on their chests. "U.S. Marshals," a booming voice echoed down the canyon. "Drop your weapons, now!" The mercenaries looked at Kincaid, who was grappling with Talon. They looked at the marshals. They looked at the buffalo rifle being reloaded by the old woman. Clatter, clatter. Guns hit the rocks. Hands went up. Kincaid, blood streaming from his ear, managed to kick Talon off. He scrambled for his fallen pistol. "I'll kill you! I'll kill all of you!" He raised the gun toward Talon. Boom! Martha didn't miss twice. The second slug caught Kincaid in the center of his chest. It lifted him off his feet and threw him backward over the cliff edge. He didn't scream. He was dead before he went over. Silence fell over the ridge, broken only by the sound of the wind and Thorne's whimpering. Talon lay on his back, staring up at the sky. His ribs were on fire, his face was battered. But he was alive. He heard the sound of hooves, scrambling up the scree. Moments later, a shadow fell over him. Martha slid off Bessie before the horse had even fully stopped. She hit the ground running, her skirts rustling, dropping the rifle to fall to her knees beside him. "Talon!" Her hands, usually so steady, were shaking as she touched his face, checking his eyes, pressing her apron against the bleeding wound in his side. "Oh God, you stubborn fool! I told you not to die!" Talon winced, but a grin broke through the blood on his teeth. He coughed, looking up at her. You brought the cavalry." "I brought the law," Marshal Graves said, stepping up behind her. He was a mountain of a man with a mustache that drooped below his chin. He looked down at Talon with grudging respect. "And I brought a woman who rode my deputies into the ground to get here. She told us everything, son. We have the ledger." 2 deputies were hauling a sobbing Colonel Thorne to his feet, clamping irons on his wrists. "It's a lie," Thorne wailed. "She's a witch. He's a savage. This is my land." "Save it for the judge, Silas," Graves spat. "You're going to Yuma. If you're lucky." Martha ignored them all. She was busy tearing strips from her petticoat to bind Talon's ribs. "You came back," Talon whispered, his voice rough. "You could have kept riding." Martha paused. She looked at the Apache warrior who had given her a home when the world threw her away. She looked at the bruises on his face, earned buying her time. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, right over the war paint of soot and blood. "I told you, Talon," she said softly, her blue eyes fierce and wet. "I'm the cook. Who else is going to make sure you eat?" Talon closed his eyes, the tension leaving his body for the first time in years. The sun was fully up now, bathing the canyon in gold. The nightmare was over. The aftermath. The trial of Colonel Silas Thorne was the talk of the territory for a decade. The ledger Martha saved exposed a corruption ring that went all the way to Washington. Thorne died in prison 2 years later, a broken, forgotten man. The Double T Ranch was dissolved, its lands auctioned off. But the 40 acres by the creek, that remained. 6 months later, the scars of the fire were gone. A new house stood on the foundation of the old shack. It was built of sturdy timber and stone, with a wide porch that faced the sunset. Talon sat on the railing, whittling a piece of cedar. He moved a little slower now. The bullet in his side still ached when it rained. But he looked at peace. He wore a clean shirt, mended with precise, caring stitches. The screen door creaked open. Martha walked out, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked healthier now, the hollows of her cheeks filled out, her step light. "Supper's on," she announced. "Venison stew. And if you tell me it needs more salt, you're sleeping in the barn." Talon chuckled. He hopped off the railing. "Wouldn't dream of it, Ma." He paused, looking out over the valley. The cattle were grazing. The water was running clear. "Martha?" "Yes?" "Thank you." She didn't ask what for. She knew. She smiled, turning back to the warmth of the house. "Wash up, Talon, before it gets cold." They were an odd pair, the warrior and the widow, the outcast and the cast-off. But as they sat down to break bread in the house they had built together, everyone in the valley knew one thing for certain. You didn't mess with the Black Wolf Ranch. Not unless you wanted to deal with the Apache and his cook. What a ride. Who would have thought that a discarded old cook and a lone warrior would make the deadliest team in the Wild West? It just goes to show. Never underestimate someone just because the world has turned its back on them. Talon and Martha didn't just save a ranch, they found redemption in each other. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good underdog story. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next adventure into the Wild West. What do you think Martha did with her share of the reward money? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching.